Okay, Kaidi.
Yes, Bhante.
Do you think we are ready to begin?
Yes, Bhante.
Yeah.
Yes, Bhante. So let us start with some quick housekeeping stuff. I'm going to share the screen. Okay, welcome everyone to the July 4th retreat on the first Discourse of the Buddha by Bhikkhu Bodhi. And on behalf of BAUS, we welcome you. And just before we get started, we have just a couple of housekeeping announcements. So I hope you could see my shared screen.
Yes, it's visible.
Okay. So first of all, I think we are also streaming on YouTube Live. So if any of you have any questions, any technical difficulties with regard to either connecting to Zoom or not seeing the videos on YouTube Live, please contact us at this tech help email, BAUS, techhelp@gmail.com. For the YouTube participants, if you actually have any questions with regard to the discourse that you would like to ask Bhante, maybe you could forward that to that email, and depending on the availability of time, we might be able to bring that to Bhante's attention. And for the Zoom audience, during the Q&A, when Bhante asked for the Q&A, you could, or rather, when you have any questions, you could raise your hand, rather use that raise hand function in Zoom to do this. If you actually click on the participants list, it will give you a list of all the participants, and over there you'll have the option to raise your hand, and Bhante or one of the volunteers then will unmute you when it comes to your chance. And the next is this actually probably depends on the device you are using, and for the people who are using maybe a desktop or a laptop computer to run Zoom, you might actually see when Bhante is sharing the screen, a vertical divider dividing on the left-hand side what Bhante is sharing from his laptop, the text and the resources he's sharing, while you'll also see a small video of Bhante on the right-hand side. And you might find like a vertical separator. This again depends on how you have set up your Zoom environment. But if you find this, you could use that divider, the slider, to either left or right to increase the size of the text on the left-hand side screen. Or if you want to see a closer look at Bhante, you could you could make his image bigger. And and a final comment to the YouTube audience: if you're viewing it through YouTube, when we end a session, typically that would happen at the between like longer breaks. if we, when we end the session, you'll have to actually close the YouTube window and restart because your previous live stream will not work when we restart live streaming in the next following session. So these are the points we wanted to share with you. And again, thank you all for joining. And we all hope you'll have a wonderful retreat. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. And Bhante, it's all yours.
Okay, so good evening, everybody, and thank you all for joining this retreat on the first discourse of the Buddha. And I'll begin in the traditional way with the salutation to the Buddha. And you could also join the palms together. And this is the salutation which has come down in Pali for many, many centuries since the time of the Buddha himself. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, so the theme or topic of this retreat will be the Sutta or Discourse of the Buddha, which goes by the name of the Dhamma Chakra Pavatana Sutta. I don't see the whiteboard, which I wanted. But I can share this file, okay. Do you see the text file which has just been put up on the screen? Okay, so the name of the sutta that we're studying is the Dhamma Chakra Pavatana Sutta. So the word Dhamma we know as the teaching or the truth behind the teaching. Chakra is a wheel, and we'll come to explain that later. And the word Pavatana means setting in motion, turning or setting in motion. So the name of the discourse is the setting in motion, the wheel of the Dhamma. And this is regarded in all Buddhist traditions as the first formal discourse of the Buddha in the recorded narrative of the Buddha's ministry. In the Pali canon, this discourse is found in the Samyutta Nikaya in chapter 56, which are the collected discourses on the Four Noble Truths, and it's sutta number 11. So it's just tucked into this middle of the Samyutta Nikaya, actually towards the end of the Samyutta Nikaya. And so it doesn't particularly stand out conspicuously amongst that vast collection. And yet this sutta has special importance because it is the sutta or discourse in which the Buddha for the first time declared to the world the truths that he had discovered through his experience of enlightenment. So when the Buddha set out to formulate the truths, the principles he had realized through his enlightenment, he did so in terms of especially the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path. And it is those principles that are laid out for the first time in the Buddha's ministry in this particular discourse. And what ties this discourse to the present time, to the month of July? According to the Buddhist tradition, the Buddha gave this discourse on the full moon day in the month of July, actually the Indian month, Asalha, or Sinhalese Asala, which corresponds to July in the Western calendar. So even though we still have a couple of weeks until the full moon day of July, but because this is the July 4th weekend, so we have extra time to hold a retreat to explore the sutta. And so according to the tradition, the Buddha attained the enlightenment in the month, on the full moon night of the month of Visakha, which we now call Vesak. And so that is the month corresponding to, in the Western calendar, to our May. And so 2 months after the enlightenment, the Buddha gave the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, in which he set in motion, proclaimed to the world for the first time the teaching of liberation, that turning that wheel that was to roll out first from Benares to roll over the greater part of northern India, then to spread out from northern India to the rest of India and to many other regions in Asia. And nowadays, that wheel is still turning and is rolling from, or has rolled from Asia to countries all over the world. Yeah, probably the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta is not the first actual utterance of the Buddha after his enlightenment, because we find in the Udana, one of the smaller works of the Pali Canon, there are several suttas which depict the Buddha sitting under the Bodhi tree or in the vicinity of the Bodhi tree right after his enlightenment. And so the Buddha spends about 7 weeks in the vicinity of the Bodhi tree after the enlightenment. And during that period, he contemplates the Dharma that he's realized, explores it, investigates it from different points of view, spends periods of time absorbed in deep meditative bliss. And then when he emerges, he utters verses sort of extolling, praising, celebrating his realization. And so those suttas, those verses, have been preserved in the Sutta Pitaka, but those were not formal discourses, but just utterances of joy and exhilaration, utterances of delight and exhilaration that the Buddha spoke in order to express the depths and enjoyment of his realization. What I want to do in today's session is to go back in time before, taking a sort of rolling back the clock or the calendar from the time of the Dhammacakkappavattana, to trace the process that led the future Buddha during the time he was a prince or a young aristocrat living in the city of Kapilavastu in the Shakyan state in northeast India, to trace the steps, the process that led him from his life, his luxurious life in the palace, led him from those conditions to that seat beneath the Bodhi tree where he attained enlightenment, and then from the Bodhi tree to the deer park near Benares, near Varanasi, where he expounded the Dhammacakka Sutta. And so I've collected a number of suttas which will take us, enable us to accompany the Bodhisattva, the future Buddha, on that journey that leads him to the Bodhi tree. And so we start off with a little sutta that occurs in the Anguttara Nikaya, the numerical discourses, where the Buddha speaks about the conditions under which he was living. Traditionally, the Buddha is said to have been the prince, the son of the king and queen of the Shakin state, but actually that is part of the legend. The Shakin state was not a monarchy, it was a republic, a kind of aristocratic republic. And so the Buddha was not literally a prince, but his father was perhaps the chieftain of the ruling clan of the Shakin state. And so they were very wealthy, very powerful. And so at that time, he says he was extreme, delicately nurtured, most delicately nurtured. And his father constructed lotus ponds just for his enjoyment. He used all of the finest accessories that were available to a wealthy person of that period. He had 3 mansions, one for each season of the Indian climate. And he spent the 4 months of the rainy season in one of those mansions being entertained by all female musicians. Okay, now in the traditional legend of the life of the Buddha, we hear that the Buddha, when he was living in the palace, had never known anything about old age, sickness, and death. But out of curiosity, he took a trip outside the palace. And then for the first time, he saw an old man, a sick man, a corpse, and then the fourth sight was a renunciant, an ascetic. But that, of course, we can understand to be a kind of symbolic representation, a legendary presentation of a psychological process through which the future Buddha was going. And we find that actual psychological process spelled out explicitly in this sutta. So here he says that while he was living such a splendid and luxurious life, it occurred to him that a foolish worldling and ordinary people, though himself subject to old age, feels repelled and a bit shocked when he sees another who is old. But then he reflects that I too am subject to old age. I too will grow old. And when he reflected in that way, then his intoxication with youth faded away, was eliminated. Similarly, it's the foolish worldling is subject to illness. When he sees another who is seriously ill, maybe vomiting, lying in his own excrement and urine, then he becomes repelled and disgusted. But then he reflected, I too am subject to illness, not exempt from illness. And so his intoxication with health was abandoned. And then the third reflection was about death. The foolish worldling is afraid of death, is shocked by death. But now the future Buddha reflects, I too am subject to death. I am bound to die. And so when he reflected in that way, then he lost his intoxication with life. So in this way, the Bodhisattva loses the 3 intoxications, the 3 kinds of vanity or 3 kinds of delusion. With youth, health, and life. And how that reflection developed and progressed, we find indicated in the next sutta that I've taken. This is called the Discourse on the Noble Quest. It occurs in the Majjhima Nikaya, Sutta number 26. Okay, here he begins by considering that there are two kinds of searches, the noble search and the ignoble search. So what is the ignoble search? So here we have somebody, a person who's subject to birth, old age, sickness, and death, and they seek what is also subject to birth, old age, sickness, and death. Subject to sorrow, they seek what's subject to sorrow. Subject to defilement, they seek what is subject to defilement. And so here, speaking himself as a male, he says, what are these things that they seek that's subject to birth, old age, sickness, and death? A wife and children, men and women slaves. This was a common practice in those days. Goats and sheep, and so on and so on. Gold and silver. Yeah, these days we could maybe eliminate some of these, but expand the range of the things that people crave. Many houses, rich, luxurious cars, expensive wristwatches, high quality electronic equipment, and so on and so forth. So all of that is the ignoble search, seeking objects of worldly enjoyment. Then what is the noble search? So here we have someone who is subject to birth, old age, sickness, and death, but having understood the danger, the drawback, the faults, the shortcomings in what is subject to birth, old age, sickness, and death, and so forth, goes out to seek that which is without aging, not subject to illness, the deathless, what is called the supreme security from bondage, which is nibbana, the state which is sorrowless and undefiled. And so that, the Buddha says, that is the noble quest, which sets in when one realizes, here the important word is the danger or drawback. The Pali word is the adinava. We could say the faults that are perpetually hidden beneath the enticing, attractive, beautiful surface of things. So when one starts to reflect wisely, clearly, deeply, and thoroughly on the objects of worldly enjoyment, then one sees through that surface, the pleasant and agreeable surface, and one starts to bring to manifestation the flaws and defects that all of these things are subject either to old age and death or to decay, deterioration, and destruction. Then one loses the attachment to them and one is ready to go out and seek that which lies beyond old age, illness, and death, which is, of course, nibbana. Okay, so now the Bodhisattva says that I too, before my enlightenment, I was still just an unenlightened Bodhisattva. So I too was caught in that trap, the trap of blind seeking objects of enjoyment. But then I reflected and I realized these faults, and I made the determination to go out and to seek the unborn, unaging, deathless, sorrowless state, nibbana. And then he says, as a young man in the bloom of youth, I shaved off my hair and beard. I put on the ochre robes and I went forth into homelessness. So this was the renunciation of the future Buddha, the Bodhisattva. So this begins the quest for enlightenment, a quest that is going to take him 6 years of study, striving, practice, until he attains his goal. So if we follow the sutta, I've just summarized it. First, after going forth, he starts to seek out some of the most eminent meditation masters of his period. And the first teacher he goes to is named Alara Kalama, who was a master of a state of samadhi, or of deep meditative absorption, which was called the Akinchanyayatana, the base of nothingness. Uh-oh, we're having a thunderstorm now. I hope we won't lose the power. Okay, the base of nothingness is a stage of deep meditative absorption. And apparently, Alara had mastered that state and took that state to be liberation, to be the ultimate goal, the highest goal. And so the Bodhisattva learned the practice under Alama, went off into seclusion to cultivate that practice. And before long, in a short time, he also mastered the base of nothingness. He comes to Alara, he reports his experience, and Alara congratulates him and offers to make the Bodhisattva a leader of this group, this community of ascetics. He places him on an equal footing with himself and says, come now, the two of us together will be the teachers of this community. So he gave him the highest honor. But then the Bodhisattva
I'm sorry, Bhante. The Zoom recording just started.
Ooh.
But it's on YouTube Live.
Okay. Okay, but the Bodhisattva would have had some kind of inherent wisdom through which he could understand that that attainment of the base of nothingness was not the final goal, was not the ultimate goal, but it was just a very deep stage of meditative absorption. And so he realized that this does not lead to the ultimate peace, to direct knowledge, to enlightenment, to nibbana, but only to rebirth in a very exalted, very refined state of existence within samsara, within the round of rebirths. And so he became disillusioned with this teaching and left it and continued his search. Then he came to another teacher named Uddaka Ramaputta, who had mastered, actually, Uddaka Ramaputta had not yet mastered the fourth formless attainment, the fourth arupa attainment, but he knew about this attainment and he knew the practice leading to it. And so he taught the practice to the base of neither perception nor non-perception. He taught the practice to the Bodhisattva, and the Bodhisattva was able to attain the base of neither perception nor non-perception, which is the fourth formless meditation. So at this point, the Bodhisattva has surpassed his own teacher in this practice. And so when he reported this to Uddaka Ramaputta, Uddaka put the bodhisattva in the position of the teacher and lowered himself so that he was willing to become a student of the bodhisattva. But again, the bodhisattva realizes that even this exalted attainment, it does not lead to the ultimate goal, to Nibbana, but only to rebirth in the fourth stage, fourth level of the formless plane of existence. So again, he leaves Uddaka Ramaputta and sets out on his quest. And now, he says, he undertakes a long course of ascetic practices. So the texts give descriptions of some of his practices. So he would go about naked. He would take food once a day, once every 2 days, sometimes once every 2 weeks. He would pull out his hair and beard. He used a mattress of spikes and so on. So in this way, he engaged in these practices of tormenting and mortifying the body. Yeah, we have various descriptions of his ascetic practices, which you can find in Majjhima Nikaya Sutta number 12 and Majjhima Nikaya Sutta number 36. Okay, now comes his discovery of the path. So after he had pursued these ascetic practices, apparently for about 6 years, until his body was reduced to just skin and bone. So they said that if he wanted to, his belly skin adhered to his backbone. So if he wanted to touch his belly, he could feel his backbone. And if he wanted to touch the backbone, he could feel the belly skin. And so he could say that at this point, whatever ascetics in the past have experienced painful feelings due to this ascetic practices, this is the utmost. There is none beyond this. And so for the future and at present. But he thinks through this painful practice of extreme asceticism, I have not attained any superior knowledge and vision, no liberating realization. And then the question comes to his mind, could there be another path to enlightenment, another way to enlightenment? And at this point, he has a recollection of an event that took place in his childhood. When he was a child, perhaps about the age of 7 or 8, we don't know the exact age, a plowing festival was to take place. And his father, together with the other Shakyan chiefs, were to participate in this plowing festival. And so the family brought the little boy along with them, and they placed him in the shade of a tree so that he would keep cool. And they went off to the field to do the plowing. And while this little boy was sitting in the shade of the tree, he crossed his legs and just started mindfully attending to his own inner state, his own experience. According to the commentaries, he was attending to his breath. And then he spontaneously entered into the meditative absorption that we call the first jhana, the first stage of meditative absorption. And then the question came to his mind, could this be the path to enlightenment? And then came the realization that this is the path to enlightenment. So this was an important discovery of the Bodhisattva. Previously, he was in agreement with the mainstream way of thinking in the ascetic communities, or the ascetic groups of the period, that the way to liberation lies in tormenting and mortifying the body, inflicting pain on the body, until at some point the soul, all of the bonds and fetters will be annihilated and the spirit will be liberated. And he probably subscribed to the belief that any kind of experience of pleasure and joy was dangerous, a base for attachment, a ground of attachment that has to be avoided. But now, as he reflected back on that experience, he saw that there are pleasant, agreeable, and delightful experiences that are not dangerous, that are not hooks of attachment, but that can be channeled and utilized as part of the path to liberation. And so the realization came to him that this kind of blissful, delightful absorption of the jhanas could be used as the path to enlightenment. And what I found interesting, when one looks at the formula for the first jhana, one could even see in that formula the basic, let's say, framework of the middle way already contained in that jhana formula. If you remember the middle way, the middle way is the path that avoids the two extremes of sensual pleasures and of self-mortification. So because the first jhana is secluded from sensual pleasures, it avoids the extreme of indulgence in sensual pleasures. And because it has rapture and pleasure, joy and happiness, born of seclusion, it avoids the extreme of self-mortification. So we could see that the discovery of the middle way was already implicit in this recollection of his childhood experience of the first jhana. Okay, so now he makes a decision to explore that jhana experience further. But he realizes that he cannot, that it isn't easy to attain that state with his body so weak and emaciated. And so he starts to resume consuming ordinary food. And it's said that at that time there were 5 ascetics who were attending upon him, hoping that he would be the one to achieve the true realization and that they would learn it from him. And we have to remember this because we're going to see that these 5 ascetics who abandoned the Buddha or the Bodhisattva are going to be the first 5 disciples to whom the Buddha will teach the Dhamma after his enlightenment. Okay, so now the Buddha starts to consume solid food until he gradually regains his health. But when he starts to eat normally, then the 5 ascetics become disillusioned with him. And they think, our ascetic Gautama has given up his striving. He's returned to a life of luxury. And so they leave him, they abandon him. Okay, now comes the description of the enlightenment, which we're going to look at from 2 different angles. So this is maybe we call this the dominant account of the enlightenment. Okay, so after the Bodhisattva regains his strength, then he enters into the first jhana, but then he continues the process of mental unification further and goes from the first jhana to the second level, to the third level, to the fourth level. So now he masters the 4 jhanas. And then with this concentrated mind, he directs, when his mind becomes concentrated, purified, rid of all disturbances, all corruptions, then it's said in the first watch of the night, he directs his mind to the recollection of his past lives and is able to recollect his many past lives, even extending over many aeons. And this becomes the first knowledge attained by him in the first watch of the night. Okay, then in the second watch of the night, again, he takes that concentrated mind and directs it out upon the world to look at the process of what is going out in the world. And so with that divine eye, he sees beings passing away and taking rebirth, and sees how beings move on from life to life in accordance with their karma, their volitional activities. So that becomes the second higher knowledge that he attains, which he reaches in the second middle watch of the night. Okay, then in the third watch of the night, then he directs his concentrated mind to the destruction of the defilements, the asavas or taints. And then he directly knows the 4 noble truths. And when he knows and sees them, then his mind is liberated from the taint of sensual desire, the taint of craving for existence, the taint of ignorance. So these are the 3, I call them the 3 primordial defilements that keep the mind in bondage to the cycle of repeated birth and death. And so with this knowledge of the 4 noble truths, the taints, the asavas are destroyed, and his mind is then liberated. And then when it's liberated, then there comes the knowledge that it's liberated. And he knows that birth is finished, the spiritual life has been lived, he's done what had to be done, there's no more coming back. And in that case, ignorance is banished and true knowledge has arisen. So this is the main account of the Enlightenment. We have another more concise account, very, very concise account. So in this account, after the Buddha has left his 2 meditation masters, he comes to a delightful grove, sits down and thinks, I will use this place for striving. And then the text tells us very simply that seeking the unborn supreme security from bondage nibbana, I attained the unborn supreme security from bondage nibbana, which is also described as the ageless, deathless, sorrowless, undefiled. And then the knowledge arises, I've attained the unshakable liberation. This is my last birth. There's no more renewed existence. So this is a very concise account. There's another account of the Buddha's enlightenment in terms of the discovery of dependent origination, but I won't go into that in detail here. But you can find that if you want to look up for yourself. It's in Samyutta Nikaya, chapter 12, sutta number 65. Okay, now we come to this period after the Enlightenment. So this is the time when the Buddha is sitting at the foot of the Bodhi tree, having just realized the supreme enlightenment. And he spends 7 days sitting cross-legged, experiencing the bliss of liberation. And then he engages in reflection on dependent origination. The first 7 days, he goes through it in forward order. Then the second period of 7 days, he goes through it in the order of cessation. And the third week, he goes through it in the order both of forward order, the order of causation, and the order of cessation. And at the end of each course of reflection, he utters an udana, an inspired verse. Verses themselves are very beautiful. Yeah, I like especially the last one. When things become manifest to the ardent, meditating Brahmin, he abides scattering Mara's host like the sun illuminating the sky. Okay, now after spending several weeks, according to the tradition, 7 weeks in the vicinity of the Bodhi tree at Bodh Gaya, now a big question is going to present itself to the mind of the newly enlightened Buddha. So first he again reflects on the Dhamma. So the big question is, should I go forth and try to teach this sublime, liberating truth, this Dhamma that I have realized? And he reflects that this Dhamma is profound, hard to see, hard to understand, peaceful, sublime, subtle to be experienced by the wise, but people in the world won't have any interest in it. They're just, maybe they have their cell phones and they're flipping through the cell phone to see what kind of videos they could watch on YouTube, or they're watching television or watching sports matches and pop singers. So here I am, I'm going to be teaching about the Four Noble Truths, and they'll be watching America Got Talent, or something like that, or the latest baseball or basketball game. So it's going to be hard for them to see this principle. What's interesting here, the Buddha mentions the 2 facets of his realization: dependent origination, which are the laws governing the workings of samsara, and the other is the principle of liberation, the destruction of craving, dispassion, cessation, nibbana. So he thinks, if I were to go out and try to teach the Dharma, other people wouldn't even be interested, let alone understanding me. And for me, it would just be a lot of work and nothing is going to come of it. And so when he reflects in that way, he said, my mind inclined to inaction. In other words, just dwelling peacefully in the forest rather than going out and trying to teach the Dhamma. But then the texts tell us, and you could understand this however you want, when the Buddha makes that decision, at least a tentative decision, the message somehow gets relayed all the ways up into the celestial realms, into the world of the Brahmas, exalted divine beings. And one of them, named Brahma Sahampati, is now worried, agitated, alarmed, thinking if the Buddha doesn't teach the Dhamma, the world is lost. And so he comes down, bows in front of the Buddha, and pleads with the Buddha, please, there are those with little dust in their eyes who will be able to understand the Dhamma, but if you don't teach, they're lost. And so he appeals, he says, arise, victorious hero, caravan leader, one free from debt, wander in the world. Let the Blessed One teach the Dhamma. There will be those who will understand. Okay, then the Buddha now said, out of compassion for beings, he uses his supernormal vision to look out upon the world. And then he sees indeed that there are beings with little dust in their eyes who are open to the teaching. And then he proclaims this verse, open for them are the doors to the deathless. Let those with ears show their faith. And so now he's decided to teach, but he next ponders the question, to whom should I first teach the Dhamma? Who will understand me quickly? So first, in the passage that's been deleted here, first he thinks of his first two meditation masters, but then he comes to realize that in the 6-year period, both of them have passed away. And then he turns his mind to the 5 monks who previously had attended upon him when he was engaged in his ascetic practices. And he decides to teach the Dhamma to them first. And so he raises in his mind the question, where are they now living? And then with his divine eye, he sees that they're living near Varanasi, in the deer park at Isipatana, which nowadays is called Sarnath. Okay, so then the Buddha gets up from the vicinity of the Bodhi tree and he starts walking to Varanasi. And this is a rather interesting encounter that takes place. There's a certain ascetic of another school of thought named Upaka who sees the Buddha and he's very impressed by the Buddha's deportment and features. And he thinks that the Buddha must have achieved some kind of higher attainment. But he assumes that the Buddha is just a seeker like himself. So he asks him, under whom have you gone forth? Who is your teacher? Whose teaching do you follow? Just as today, if you meet some fellow seeker, you might say, who is your guru? What kind of teaching or meditation are you practicing? So that is what Upaka asked the Buddha. And the Buddha responded, saying in effect, that I have no teacher. It sounds a little boastful to our ears. For one like me exists nowhere in all the world with all its gods, because I have no counterpart. And then he says, I am the accomplished one. I am the supreme teacher. I am the fully enlightened one whose fires are quenched and extinguished. But Upaka just shakes his head and says, it may be so, friend. It may be so, friend. And then he goes off in a different direction. So the Buddha continues along his journey until eventually he comes to Varanasi. It's probably perhaps about a 10-day walk, a week walk from Bodh Gaya to Varanasi. And so eventually he arrives at the deer park and he approaches the group of 5 ascetics. And they see him coming in the distance and they make an agreement amongst themselves. So they say, here comes the ascetic Gautama, He gave up his quest. He's living luxuriously. He's rather bulky, strong. And here we are so reduced to skin and bones. We've been engaged in our ascetic practices. So he's fallen away from the path. And so we shouldn't get up and pay homage to him or receive his bowl and robe. But since he's coming to us, you can set out a seat for him. And if he wants, he can sit down and join us. But as the Buddha approached, these monks were not able to keep their pact. But one got up to greet him. They took his bowl and robe, prepared a seat, and so on. But they continued to address him in Pali with the word avuso, which doesn't really mean friend, but it's a kind of friendly term of address that people would use to those who are roughly their equals. So they would call him avuso. But the Buddha said, don't address, now he calls himself the Tathagata. Don't address him by name and by the word avuso. Because now he says, I am an arahant, a sammasambuddha, one who is fully liberated and perfectly enlightened. And I've realized the Dhamma. I've attained the deathless, and I can teach you the Dhamma. I can guide you to the deathless. So if you practice as I instruct you, then you yourselves will attain the supreme goal of the holy life. So the Buddha's words must have been very compelling, but the group of 5 monks were quite obstinate, and they protested and said, when you were practicing your asceticism, you couldn't achieve any higher realization. And now you're living luxuriously. So how could you attain some superior realization? But he protested and said, I do not live luxuriously, and I have not given up striving, but I am now the Arahant, the Tathagata, the Arhat, the perfectly enlightened one. So 3 times he spoke like that. 3 times the 5 monks rejected his appeal. So now the Buddha used a different tactic. So he said to them, I'm a little elaborating on my own here, sort of filling in what he must have said. You know that I'm sincere and earnest. I'm not a hypocrite, not a fool. And you know that if I hadn't attained realization, I wouldn't be deceiving you and trying to tell you that I've attained. And you've never heard me before say that I've attained realization, have you? And so they said, no. So they said, but this time I'm telling you truthfully and honestly, I got it. I've reached the goal. And so now they changed the word of address. In a way, this word is the giveaway. So instead of using the word avuso, which is the word used roughly amongst equals, they now say no Bhante. And Bhante is the word that a junior would use in reference to a senior. Okay, so in this way, he says, I was able to convince the 5 monks. And it is at this point, after convincing the 5 monks, that the Buddha spoke the Dhammacakka Pavattana Sutta. And so we follow now the Buddha from his pre-enlightenment days as a young prince or young aristocrat living in luxury in the palace of Kapilavatthu. We followed his reflections that dispelled his infatuation with youth, health, and life. We followed him through his renunciation, his early training in the meditative absorptions, his ascetic practices, his discovery of the middle way, his attainment of enlightenment, and his decision to teach. And now we come to the point where the Buddha will proclaim the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, which will start tomorrow. Okay, so now I think maybe I could leave some time, maybe about 10 minutes for questions. If anybody has questions, then I think you know the way to raise those questions is to go to your participant list. I don't have it because I think I'm the co-host, but you'll see a kind of hand symbol. And you would click that hand symbol to pose the question. But questions should be related to the material that I've covered this evening. Okay, I see a hand. Lim Kim Hung.
Yeah, Bante, thanks for the teaching. Regarding you were mentioning just now that initially when he intended to teach, when he learned, he was learning from the two great meditation teachers.
Yeah.
But the thing is, you were mentioning that they have teach him until the higher absorption, where they attain the arupa jhana. But later, you were saying that he recalled when he's young, he able to achieve first jhana when during the plowing festival. But the thing is, I thought he had achieved to achieve the arupa jhana, he should have achieved the first until the 8th jhana, right?
Yeah. That's a very interesting question. And I started to ponder that question when I first started to study Buddhism or learn the life of the Buddha, like more than 50 years ago. And I've never been able to find a real satisfactory answer to the question. Because it seems, in fact, even the commentary says that when the Buddha was studying under Alara, he had mastered the 7 meditative attainments, which implies that he had gone through the 4 jhanas. And when he studied with Uddaka Ramaputta, he would have again gone through the 4 jhanas and the 4 arupa attainments. So why did he have to go back to that childhood experience of the first jhana to discover the middle path? It's a puzzle. I haven't seen it discussed in any commentary explicitly. I just have my own theory to answer that. Okay, my theory is this, that when he was practicing under the earlier teachers, the objective was to go quickly through the jhanas and to reach the formless attainments, because those are states of pure equanimity. So the idea was dominant that one should avoid states of pleasure and move to states of equanimity, of neutral feeling. And so the idea was still lingering in the mind of his teachers and the Bodhisattva himself, that pleasant states are to be avoided. But when he was engaged in the ascetic practices, when he recollected that childhood experience, then he knew that there are wholesome states of pleasure and joy and delight that can be used as a basis for liberation. So that showed him that the middle way can be a pleasant and delightful way, that one doesn't have to avoid pleasure and happiness and joy in order to go straight, to go either towards pain through the ascetic practices or towards equanimity in the formless absorptions. So that's my theory.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, then Andrew. Andrew. Did you want to ask the question? You would have to unmute.
Oh, I had some difficulty with that. Thank you, Bhante. I have heard the expression the Buddha had exclaimed on his realization that householder, I have found you, house builder, I have found you.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that from the Pali texts?
Yeah, that verse is actually found included in the Dhammapada, and it occurs within the narrative of the Buddha, the story of the Buddha's attainment of enlightenment that we find, for example, in the commentaries. The introduction to the Jataka commentary has a full account of the Buddha's quest for enlightenment. And according to the commentary and the tradition, that was the first verse or first exclamation that the Buddha made immediately after the enlightenment. Aneka jati samsaram sadavi sang and bibi sang kahakarakang kavesanto dukkha jati puna puna. So yeah, the verse saying that I have wandered through this round of births vainly, life after life, seeking the builder of the house. Painful is life after life. But now, householder, you are seen. You will not build your house again. Your pillar has been pulled away. All of your rafters have been destroyed. Yeah, that is said to be the first verse uttered after the Enlightenment. Okay, any other questions? Again, use the hand, the hand symbol. Oh, I see. Okay, there's one V, VI. V, you would have to unmute.
Hello, Bhante. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah, please go ahead. No, I don't hear anything now. Yeah, you're still muted, I think.
Can you hear me?
Okay, now I hear you.
Bhante, in respect of Buddha, when he was, he recalled that he was a kid. When he was a kid, he entered into the first jhana, where he's, is it because that when he was meditating under the Bodhi tree, he's actually having the right view, whereas two of his earlier teachers do not have the right view? Could it be possible that the right view actually set him at the right path to enter into the so-called to realize the Four Noble Truths? Could that be the
Yeah,
reason?
well, from the account that we saw, what he realized when he was sitting under the Bodhi tree, what was the Four Noble Truths, and it's that knowledge of the Four Noble Truths that is the world transcending or liberating right view. And so his teachers would have had, of course, some kind of maybe practical wisdom, but they didn't have the the kind of wisdom that leads to liberation. That is what they were lacking. And so they had mastered the meditative absorptions, but they made the mistake of taking the particular meditative absorption that they had achieved, taking that meditative absorption to be the attainment of liberation. Whereas the Bodhisattva, because of his superior wisdom, was able to see the drawback or deficiency in the
Right.
mastery of those meditative attainments.
So, sorry, I entered the Zoom a little bit late. I may have missed the first part. I think that I read some of the articles that you sent it to us. It mentioned that Buddhas actually destroyed the taints at the point where he became a Buddha. So normally it's defined as the cause of suffering, which is the sensual pleasure. You disregard the sensual pleasure. You understand the concepts of assistance or non-assistance. But in this instance, I read that it was actually about ignorance. So will Bhante actually will be going through how to destroy the ignorance? Because if we have blind spot, if we are ignorant, how do we know that we are ignorant?
Yeah, I think maybe that question may be more pertinent to some of the later sessions that we're going to be having.
Okay, thank you. I
Yeah.
don't have further question.
Excuse me?
I don't have further question. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Okay, I see Mitra Ganavata. Be sure to unmute.
Hello, Bhikkhu Bodhi.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
So thank you very much for the teachings, and may you have good health. So the question came to my mind, why Brahma Sampati came and tell Lord Buddha that there are people with less dust in their eyes, but he was not interested in learning.
I believe, according to the commentary, Brahma Sahampati had become a non-returner, an anagami, under the previous Buddha. I think it was the Buddha Kassapa. And so he was already, say, close to liberation. Yeah, so it would not have been necessary. And probably once the Buddha began to teach, as we'll see when we come to the end of the Dhammacakka Sutta, when the Buddha taught the Dhammacakka Sutta, there were many Brahmas from the Brahma world who were also present listening to the discourse. So it's quite possible that Brahma Sahampati was present at that time. But we could just say that the role or function of Brahma Sahampati within the scheme of the Buddha's teaching, that he is the one whose job is to persuade the Buddha to start to teach. But when the Buddha starts to teach, his disciples are going to be human beings, not initially devas. Okay, we could take, I see, two other hands, and then we'll have to end with those two. One is William Way, and the other is Rajesh. So please unmute, William.
Good morning, Bhante. Yeah, my question is, since, can you hear me?
I could hear you, but it's evening here.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, my question is, since Buddhism originated in India, but it seems that it's not so popular in India. What is any reason for that?
Yeah, that's a completely different question. I really have to say that the question should be restricted to the subject matter that's covered within the presentation.
Okay,
there are probably books on the decline and disappearance of Buddhism in India, which can provide answers to those historical questions.
Okay, thank you, Bhante.
Yeah. Okay, Rajesh.
Okay, Bhante, if you don't mind, several times you have referred to, in answering the questions and in your discussion, you referred to the commentaries.
Yeah.
While it is not directly related to what he talked about, I don't quite understand what the relationship between the commentaries is and the Pali Canon is. Because the commentaries were written far after the Pali Canon, and how reliable are they when you give these answers, explanations?
Yeah, well, actually, I think the commentary preserves material that would have come from a very, very early period. The commentary is developed over a period of maybe 400 years after the passing away of the Buddha. But I would say that the commentaries, though they, especially when telling the story of the Buddha, they elaborate it in ways sometimes that seem rather incredible to us, but they do provide a lot of material that I would say derived from a very early period. And so to fill out the story, pieces of the story that are missing in the canonical account, I would say the commentary fulfills a useful purpose.
Thank you.
Okay, maybe we'll take one question if it's a quick one. I see the hand. Richie?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, I wanted to ask a question about for the 4 jhanas and other 7 meditative attainments that the Buddha had. For my understanding, that you can have that is perceiving without perceiving, neither non-perception, with some sort of a like system of reward that you have already built up within yourself, which the Buddha had done something with these other procedures that he learned or whatever, which inside of him, so that he could then take his divine eye to the celestial. What are these lists of procedures or jhanas that he had?
Maybe rephrase the question. I didn't quite catch the intent.
I could know the different meditations by their names, such as perceiving without perceiving and neither non-perception that he had gone through.
Yeah. So what is the question?
What are the jhanas and the meditative attainments that had led him to go into his greater state?
Yeah, well, these are 4 stages of meditative absorption. We call these collectively, we call them stages of samadhi, of mental concentration or unification. And so as one goes through the jhanas, then the mind becomes increasingly more unified, more tranquil, more settled and peaceful. And that opens up a capacity for higher types of knowledge that are usually closed off to us because our minds are overrun by discursive thinking and mental defilements. So in brief, that would be the answer to your question.
Well, thank you very much. That explains a lot as well.
Okay, we're going to now end the discussion for this evening, and we come to the next period, which is the period of meditation and of let me check the schedule. Yeah, so we will do a period of meditation on loving kindness and the sharing of the merits. So maybe we take a 5-minute break. It's 8:20 now. And so we'll come back, let's say 8:25, and then we'll do the short meditation of loving kindness and the sharing of the merits. So please don't fall away, but please come back and be sure you're online if you want to share in. Join in the sharing of the merits, join in at 8:25. Okay, so let us resume. And we don't need the sharing anymore. Okay, so for this session, you could take a comfortable meditation posture. Whether you're sitting cross-legged on a mat or on a meditation bench, or if you find that difficult, you could be sitting in a straight back chair. Wherever you're sitting, what's most important is to keep the torso, the upper part of the body, keep it straight and upright, but not stiff or rigid. Let the weight of the body be supported by the pelvis and the buttocks against the seat. Hands can be placed on the lap, right hand over the left, thumbs lightly touching. But if you prefer, you can keep the hands on the knees or on the thighs, whatever you prefer. The head should be held with the nose perpendicular to the navel, mouth closed, eyes lightly closed, and the chin pulled in just a very slight angle. And we're going to be doing what's called Metta Bhavana, the meditation of loving kindness. So what I'm going to do is to mention different groups of people and some phrases, some words that express the feeling of loving kindness. Then when I mention each group or each person or each group, I'm going to pause for a few minutes. And in that pause, you turn the words over and over in your mind, in your heart, trying to generate the feeling that corresponds to the words. Okay, first, let us just sit quietly and settle in to the felt sense of the body. Just feel the body in the immediate present. You can start by feeling the buttocks against the seat, the legs against the ground, or if you're sitting on a chair, the feet against the ground. And then move into the body as a whole in the sitting position. And if you notice any tension, tight spots in the body, just relax them. Let the body be soft but firm. Then let the mind move to the region of the heart. And softly settle into that region. Okay, now begin by calling to mind your own image. So we first send the loving kindness to ourselves, to each of us send it to ourselves individually. So if you like, you could imagine an image of yourself as though you were standing about 5 yards away. And then generate the wish. We'll use just 3 phrases. May I be well. That means healthy of body and mind. May I be happy, truly and deeply happy. May I be safe, safe from all dangers. So in the silence, turn those phrases over, trying to generate that warm feeling of loving kindness towards yourself. The wish that you yourself will be well, happy, and safe. Okay, now we're going to expand the range of our mind. So now you take a few of your dear ones. This could be dear family members or very close friends, but no more than 4, just 3 or 4. Bring them into your heart. If you like, you can see them in your mind's eye and generate the wish, may my dear ones be well, that is healthy. May they be truly happy. May they be safe from all harm and danger. And don't just recite the words like automatically or mechanically, but use them to try to generate the feeling expressed by the words. It's a little bit like using a spoon to stir a soup if you're cooking a soup to get the maximum flavor in the soup. So you use the phrases to generate that feeling of loving kindness. Okay, now you expand the range of the mind still further by taking a few, we call these neutral people, into your heart. These can be simple, mere acquaintances, like some neighbors or colleagues at work. If you're a student, fellow students, just 3 or 4, don't try to go beyond 4. Just bring them, even 2, enough. Just bring them into your heart. See them as people just like yourself and generate the wish, may these good people be well. May they be truly happy. May they be safe. Okay, now you expand the range of the mind still further by taking in the entire population of the country in which you're living. Whatever country you're in, take the entire population. This is initially is quite difficult, but the way I find useful for myself is to think that all of the people in this country are really my own mother and father, or the younger ones, my own sons and daughters, just in different physical forms. And so in your imagination, you take in the whole population and generate the thought, may all of these people be well, may they all be happy, may they all be safe. Okay, now we'll expand the range of the mind still further by taking the entire human population of the planet Earth. Take the people in every continent, every country, every race, ethnicity, language, religion, all human beings. Bring them all into your heart, generate the wish. May they all be well. May they all be happy. May they all be safe. And now you expand the range of the mind to the ultimate limit by taking all sentient beings into the range of our minds. So expand the mind to cover all the different realms of sentient beings. In our Buddhist terms, we would say the devas or divine beings, the yakas or demonic beings, the pretas or hungry ghosts, as well as the animals. So all beings everywhere, wishing them all to be well, may all be happy, may all be safe. Continue generating and extending loving kindness. And I'm going to recite the verses for sharing the merits of our program this evening. In the Buddhist tradition, we believe that when we do meritorious deeds, like discussing Dharma, listening to Dharma, practicing meditation, we generate wholesome karma, which we call merit, and we can share that merit with beings in need. So you could bring to mind, for example, any departed relatives, departed friends, and mentally you can share the merits with them. If you don't have any particular people to focus on, just continue to send the loving kindness towards all sentient beings. Akasata cha bhumata devanaga mehidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanam. Akasata cha bhumata devanaga mehidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanam. Akasata cha bhumata devanaga mehidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang. Dukkha pata cha nidukha baya pata cha nibaya soka pata cha nisoka hantu sabepi panino. May those in suffering be free from suffering. May those in fear be free from fear. May those in sorrow be free from sorrow. May all living beings also be thus. And then you go sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And then to end the session, we could just rub the palms together
Sadhu, sadhu,
Sadhu,
sadhu.
sadhu,
and rub the palms over the face.
sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu.
Then down the neck, shoulders, the lower back, buttocks, then to the knees. And if you've been sitting cross-legged, then down to the feet and the toes. And maybe we could end with 3 bows to the Buddha. Bow 1, 2, 3.
Bow to Bante. Thank you, Bante.
And let me just get the schedule to make sure. Yeah, tomorrow we will have, starting at 6 a.m., 6 to 6:50 a.m., we'll have some chanting and meditation. I believe the formulas or the text for the chanting have been shared through the website. So we have about 15, 20 minutes of chanting, then about a half an hour of meditation. And then at 8:50, another period of meditation. It'll be last until 9:30. And then at 9:30, then we will begin the next class session with lecture and discussion. Okay, so thank you all for joining and hope to see you back again tomorrow.
Thank you, Bante.
Thank you, Bante.
Thank you, Bante.
Night. Thank you.
Thank you, Bante.
Bante.
Sadhu, Bante.
Thank you, Bante.
Good night.
Sadhu, sadhu,
Okay.
sadhu.
Thank you, Bante. Good night.
Good night.
See you
Okay, good
tomorrow,
night.
Bante. See you
Sleep
tomorrow.
well.
Okay, okay,
Thank you,
Bante.
okay, good night.
Giờ走咗好多啦。